You're now live.
Okay, we're live and we are back. This is Senate Finance. We're going to continue our work today with our annual report on tax expenditures. And I don't see Graham. Patrick, are you ready to start? Can you start walking us through
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to start.
Here comes Graham.
Speak of the devil.
We were trying to let him off the hook. Graham, I was about to have Patrick take his maiden voyage, but I think he's glad that you've shown up.
Well, I think Pat will be taking the reins on this one. He will be walking the committee through tax expenditure. I'm just here to answer any questions that Pat is unable to answer. So
Okay.
with
All
that, I'll
right.
turn it over to Pat.
Pat, this is your maiden voyage, so off you go. Consider the champagne bottle smashed.
So I have a presentation I'm planning on sharing with everyone, but I'll just check first if you'd like to share my screen with that or if you prefer to look at it on your own device.
I think sharing your screen is helpful.
Okay. Let me know when you can see that.
Yes.
Great.
Can.
All right. So we are here, I guess, for the record, Pat Titterton, Joint Fiscal Office. Here today, happy to be here to talk about the tax expenditure report. I do have it noted here, it's the 22 tax expenditure report, but as many of you may know, it's a biennial report. So the last version was published in 21. So just to start as an overview, what is a tax expenditure? These are statutory provisions which reduce the amount of revenue that would otherwise be collected, otherwise known as foregone tax collections. And they're usually done to encourage a particular activity or to limit the amount of taxes collected from certain groups. And some examples of those, so for credits and deductions, these include things like the earned income tax credit and the Social Security deduction. And some exemptions could include things that are exempt from the sales tax, like clothing. And so the JFO, in conjunction with the Department of Taxes, works on this report every other year and attempts to estimate wherever possible as many of those expenditures are happening and to what magnitude they are. So as I said, this is a biennial report that was last published in 2001. Next report will actually be in 23, so apology for that typo. And in it, there are estimates for fiscal years 18 and 19, and along with some fiscal year 22 projections. There are actuals available for personal income taxes and property taxes for fiscal year 20. Just because there's data available for that. And every other year there's a full review or two that are done on expenditures related to housing and community development. Well, those are included in this version. And those full reviews were done for the Downtown and Village Center Tax Credit Program and clothing and footwear sales tax exemptions. And it also included 3 expedited reviews, which were done for the mobile home park credit, the affordable housing tax credit, and the charitable housing investment tax credit. So moving right into the overlying numbers. So this is a picture of the big pie. You can see here that the biggest expenditure within this is the sales and use tax, almost 270 million. Followed by property tax, personal income, and motor vehicle fuel, making up the vast majority of the rest. Just as a note, this excludes the Vermont standard deduction and personal exemptions. So you can see, we'll see later how much those add, but you can see that right now there's the tax expenditures from the last report came out to about 517.2 million. And if anyone has any questions, just feel free to interrupt me at any time. So
Okay, and you have to holler once again. I can't see you.
So just on that chart, Pat,
Yes.
you're saying that from what we would normally get under each of these taxes, there are exemptions that amount to the numbers in the pie chart?
that's correct.
Okay.
And I have a quick follow-up question on that too.
Sure.
Is elsewhere in the report, do you go into who the, I don't know what we should call them, beneficiaries of the exemption are in more detail?
Well, a lot of the exemptions are tailored to particular people. If there are any you are particularly interested in, Grant might have a little bit of more depth on some of those. So I don't know if there are any particular ones you're most interested in.
Well, just to go with the biggest, do we know who benefits from the sales and use tax exemption?
Yeah, so I know generally some of the big carve outs in that are things like groceries, clothing, energy for residences. And generally those are targeted towards exempting essentials that most people need. So it's a way to help, I guess you'd say, lower income households better afford some of the essentials that they need.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
so not, not to raise a sore subject, but
Uh-huh.
sales and use tax, where does something like the cloud tax fall?
That would be in sales and use.
Well, I know it's in sales and use, but are you considering that an exemption now that goes to?
Yes,
that's
it's not, it is a sale that is not taxed. So I don't know how it figures in here.
Madam Chair, this is Graham Campbell from the Joint
Yeah.
Fiscal Office. The exemption for vendor hosted pre-written computer software, otherwise known as the cloud tax, is not included in this sales and use tax exemption. It is exempt, but it is not sort of exempt in the traditional way that sales tax exemptions are listed in statute. Within sales and use tax statute, there are lists of goods that are exempted from the sales
Okay.
tax, whereas the sales tax on computer, or essentially the cloud tax, what it does is it's a session law carve out, and essentially what it says is that pre-written computer software accessed remotely is not considered tangible personal property. And so tangible personal property is the basis of the sales tax, and it's essentially saying it is not that.
Okay, so it is not included in here. If we did exempt it, I guess then it would be included.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions? If
Yeah,
not,
Madam Chair,
Pay
just quickly,
attention.
what is the bank franchise and insurance premium tax exemption?
Yeah,
down,
so
tax credits.
ready?
Yep.
Okay. So the bank franchise and insurance premium. So bank franchise tax is, I think it's a 0.0096% tax on average monthly deposits that banks hold. And so one area where credits can affect that tax is through the programs like the downtown, the downtown housing investment program. So one thing that a lot of banks will do is they'll actually purchase those credits from the developers and then use those credits to reduce their liability on their bank franchise taxes.
But that's separate. That now you're talking about how their strategy to lower their tax bill, but this is a tax expenditure here, right? So is it because they don't pay a corporate tax, they pay their bank franchise fee? We consider that expenditure?
Sorry, Graham, did you have something to add to that?
Sorry, I may have missed the underlying question here. That the bank franchise tax and the insurance premiums tax, the banks do not pay the corporate income tax. I mean, if they're domiciled in Vermont, you know, big, large financial institutions, say like Chase or whatever, they would probably pay the corporate income tax. But if you have a deposit base in Vermont, the tax that you pay is the bank franchise tax. And the big expenditures, the tax carve outs within the bank franchise tax, as Pat said, or the downtown and village center tax credit program, because banks use that to reduce, they essentially give developers the money, or essentially they buy those credits and they reduce their bank franchise tax liability. The other one within the insurance premiums tax is the exemption for annuities. Annuities are not subject to the insurance premiums tax.
Was that what this 29 million is?
It's there are others in there, but I think annuities is about 11 million or so. I'm trying to remember the others, but yeah, the downtown tax credits are generally about 1 to 2 million on top. So I'd have to look exactly at the report to see, but maybe Pat can fill me in here or help me out.
No, I mean, that sounds right from what I'm remembering right now.
So if we up the downtown tax credit by $1 million this year, that's how we finance downtown improvements. The banks buy the credits from the developer. The developer uses that money to do the project. The banks get the tax deduction. And if we up it, that little slice of the pie is going to get a little bit wider. That's why it's an expense.
That's correct. And oftentimes there's a lag between it. So the credits issued in, say, 2022 might show up on the tax expenditure report, 2 years later when banks actually claim the credits. So yes, the downtown and village tax credits can show up in the personal income tax, the corporate income tax, and the bank franchise tax, but they mostly show up in the bank franchise tax. The other one that off the top of my head I can remember that reduces bank franchise tax is the exemption for credit unions. Credit unions are not subject to the bank franchise tax. And that's, I think, due to, I think it had something to do with the regulation, the federal regulation of credit unions. And so any deposits in a credit union are not subject to the bank franchise tax, and that's considered a tax expenditure. And that's about, I think, $5 or $7 million a year.
Okay.
Let's continue.
All right. So moving into
Madam Chair,
Yes. Senator
Is-
McDonald.
so on the pie chart, is the yellow exemption for motor vehicles, is that municipal and school-owned school buses and plow trucks and stuff? State police cars, is that what the
so I know that there are no
what the
end
motor
user.
vehicle fund purchase and use?
No, that's purchase and use.
Motor vehicle fuel and purchase and use tax exemption, is that municipal vehicles and state vehicles?
This is Graham Campbell again from Joint Fiscal. No, it's not exemptions for municipal, state government, and school vehicles. We don't estimate those as tax expenditures. What that one mostly is the trade-in allowance for from purchase and use. So when you sell your car to a dealership, they don't pay purchase and use essentially, and I think that's the majority of that tax expenditure, that slice of the pie there.
Well, when you sell it, whoever buys the car pays it. So
Right. If you were to sell your vehicle to a private party, the private person who bought it from you would have to pay purchase and use tax. But when you sort of sell it, quote unquote, to a dealer, when you're making a trade-in, the purchase and use tax is not due at that point. And so that's considered a tax expenditure. That's the majority of this slice here.
Okay, but we pick probably more of that up when that vehicle is resold at a higher price, generally speaking. Right? If I sell it to the dealer and 2 weeks later, he sells it to somebody else, that somebody else pays the purchase and use tax.
they certainly would pay the purchase and use tax. I'll have to look at the mechanics, but what I can say right now is that most of that 37.5 million comes from the exemption for trade-in allowances. So I can get back to the committee on that.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to move us along because we are running short and we have a hard stop at 5 because we've got a training session.
All right, well, I'll keep that in mind. So moving into the realm of
Well, we've got
personal.
somebody else after you, so
Well, I'll plow ahead.
we'll move this along.
All right, so moving into the realm of personal income tax, Act 11 from 2018. So there were some tax expenditures in there that are now fully online and have been estimated. These included the Social Security exemption, the personal exemption and standard deduction become Vermont tax expenditures, whereas previously they had been federal flow-throughs. And there's also a charitable tax credit that's become fully online as well. The capital gains exclusion from fiscal year 2020. This was the first year of the $350,000 cap on the 40% exclusion. And also in 2020 was the first year the medical deduction was made effective. So looking at the pie chart, was there a question?
What I think isn't it the new medical deduction? Because there was a medical deduction and then we changed it when we redid the tax code. And was it 16 or 17?
That's correct, Madam Chair. The medical deduction, when you switch to federal AGI in 2018 as a starting place, you essentially wiped out the medical deduction. But starting in tax year 19, there was a new medical deduction that Vermont put in place. And so that's what this is referring to.
Right. Okay.
So similar to the overall pie chart, so this is one here for just focusing on the personal income tax expenditures. The biggest one here is the earned income tax credit, which accounts for over 26 million. And then that's followed by the capital gains exclusion, which includes that new cap. And just some examples of a couple other things that are included in that other section, which is accounting for almost 13 million. So that includes things like the downtown tax credit, municipal bond income exemptions, child and dependent care credit. So those are all included within that slice of the pie. And not included here again are the standard deduction and the personal exemptions. And you can see at the bottom there that, if those were included, it would sort of skew the scale of the entire chart. But, as I mentioned before, this is sort of the first report where that delineation was switched between the flow through and counting it as this tax expenditure. But yeah, so 132.5 million for the standard deduction, and then almost 120 million for the personal exemptions.
Okay.
And so moving into the corporate income tax realm, you'll see a lot of zeros on this page. And the reason for that is that, generally if there's a zero, there wasn't anybody actually claiming this credit. And then, for the municipal bond income exemption, that's an example of something where there isn't sufficient data to be able to, quantify that. And so the only line item on here that actually pops up is this research and development tax credit, which what that is, it's equal to 27% of the federal tax credit of the same amount. And the federal credit is 20%, so it's 27% of the 20%. And it has a 10-year credit carry forward that filers can use. So if you max out your liability, you can carry it forward and apply it to your next year's. I guess just plowing ahead, we'll switch gears a little bit to sales and use tax, some new and notable ones. There was some updates in this report to the methodology used for some of the estimates. A lot of that had to do with either new or different or better reporting systems and just new data in general. And this applied to medical products, clothing exemptions, and groceries. And some of the estimates, so groceries here for 2019, that $117 million figure was revised down to $89.3 million due to the change in methodology. And then same year, 2019, for medical products, that was revised from 64.3 million down to 54.3 million. So that change in methodology is essentially reducing some of the estimated foregone tax collections that are happening. And also there was a new estimate provided for sales by and from 501c3, so nonprofit organizations, and that was estimated to be 15.4 million. And this is a breakdown of some of the biggest expenditures by category. You can see by and far the largest section here is sales of food. So that's that 89.3 million figure. Medical products, also another big one, and energy purchases for residents. So, you know, sort of what we talked a little bit about later with Senator Bray's question, you can see a lot of these categories are sort of geared towards essential items that, you know, all households need. So typically probably thought to be benefiting lower and moderate low income households who eat up a larger percent of their budget on these items. And so the meals and rooms tax, you can see there's a lot of different line items here. A lot of them are not estimated for, as I said before, usually insufficient data available for those particular items. But one thing that we do see here are grocery type items that you can take out, you know, think like prepared and heated foods from that you can get from grocery stores. And things that are food that's served on the premise of schools, served in hospitals, and you know, summer camps for children. So a lot of environments, you know, public services environments are exempt from this tax. And the breakdown of that comes out to, so it's 9% tax on prepared restaurant meals, another 9% on lodging and meeting rooms and hotels, and 10% tax on the sales of alcoholic beverages sold in restaurants. So plowing ahead onto property tax. This is some of the exemptions that are realized by, you know, you see a lot of institutional exemptions here, like state colleges, hospitals, and then there's a carve out here for TIF districts, which if you ever have any questions about, Graham knows all about that stuff. So I don't know if there are any particular questions here, but in the interest of time, I can keep moving ahead.
Well, where is the exemption for state-owned property?
Madam Chair, this is Graham Campbell again. All state-owned property, you know, anything related to state, local, federal government exemptions. So not just, you know, state and government, like government purchases, property, stuff like that. That's not calculated in the tax expenditure report. It's in a section called items not estimated, and so anything related to and state.
Just want to make sure we aren't sweeping it under the rug. All right.
Yes, but
okay, I've got an internet connection is not stable, and I don't know if that's mine. No? Can you hear me? No.
Yes, Graham.
Yes,
we
I
can
can.
hear you.
I think
Graham
it's
was
I think
cutting
it's
out a little bit.
Graham sounded a little fuzzy. Okay. We'll keep going.
All right, so this circles back to something we touched on earlier. These are that carve out from that first pie chart with regards to the bank franchise tax. And we've already discussed some of these, but if there are any further questions on this section, I'm happy to move ahead.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna keep moving.
And again, this is another subject that we've touched upon, a lot of it coming from the trade-in allowance. You can see like right at the bottom there, that's by far the largest expenditure here, with some relatively minor carve-outs for some other sections. And
Pat, can I just jump in quickly here because I
Sure.
have some information. There was a question about the trade-in allowance, and the reason that's in place is it effectively prevents double taxation. So, we don't want to double tax the same car when the dealer buys the car. We exempt that from purchase and use tax, but then when they turn around and sell it, the purchaser pays the purchase and use tax. So it's essentially avoiding double taxation. That's the reason why it's in effect.
It's when you buy something for resale
Yes,
as
more
a
or less.
business. Yeah, okay.
and that's the last slide.
Okay.
Very compact and hopefully gave you
was.
all the information you need on that for now anyway.
Okay. Oh, yeah, we'll be back to it. Committee, any questions at this point? Whoa.
Thank you.
Guys did a really good job. We started 5 minutes late with the break and we're only 3 minutes late. So we're hanging in there. We're
Yeah,
back
2
to
minutes.
we're back to our usual cattle prod, keep moving schedule. Okay. So thank you, Patrick. That was a good first run, and Graham. And committee, we are going on. I may have this on for vote, but I don't if I don't have to. This is 169, which is the base thing, which is paying back the city of Barry for its overpayment in its TIF district, property tax overpayment. And then there's the second section, which would leave the Secretary of Education to make those payments automatically in similar situations. That is on there for purposes of discussion. I would like to pay the city of Barry back their overpayment, but one way or the other, this is one of those bills I'd like to just kind of keep clearing off the boards. And so we have today, last time we heard from the city, and we heard from, no, we didn't get to the House member. We heard from the city and from Ledge Council about this. And today we're going to hear from the auditor's office and from Brad James, who's the finance manager at the Agency of Education. So, Mr. Ash, welcome back. Are we as cruel for maiden runs here as we are for first bills on the floor?
Yes, we can decide that in about 20 minutes.
Okay. So and is Tanya with you or separate from you, or?
She
This is
should be
your show.
joining, but I can take it from
Okay,
here. and-
no, I just saw her. There she is.
Yep.
Okay, I don't know how you have this set up, if you're together or separate testimony, but the floor is yours.
Okay, Tim Ash, Deputy State Auditor. Hello, everybody. We provided a memo, which I think sums up our views on the three sections of the bill, but I'll be extremely brief and see if you have questions. First, just a reminder, Tanya's team did a performance audit of the Barry TIF. One of the findings was that due to some errors in calculation, the city of Barry actually should receive funds back from the education fund, but the Agency of Education said they did not have the authority to do that without a legislative intervention like what you're proposing. So one of our recommendations was to seek just such a accommodation. So the first section, I think, addresses exactly what it intends to do, which is to rectify that. I would note that the timing of when they should receive the money by, this is more of a technical point. It says that no later than fiscal year 23, which is a way of giving a deadline for something to happen, which I haven't really encountered before, I don't think, rather than just give a date by June 30th or by such and such date. So small matter, but just something to think about. On the second section, which tries to give authority to the agency moving forward to avoid having to come back and do these kinds of quick fixes, two general points. One is that while the reporting, I think, is very helpful for future oversight, doing a report to the General Assembly on an annual basis might be, for lack of a more technical term, a bit overkill. It might be better to have notification go directly to this committee and House Ways and Means with an explanation of why they're doing what they're doing, just since this committee is really the one that focuses on it. And then the second piece that we just raised as a policy consideration, the last words of section 2 that are new additions refer to coming back to the committee prior to doing any reimbursements. And so I think if the goal is to allow the agency to fix overpayments that are the result of a clerical or administrative error, I don't know if the intention is that they come back and have to get some kind of new approval. If that's the case, it would be kind of like the status quo. So I raise to you guys, if you just want them to be able to go ahead and do it, but you're concerned that they might make an overpayment refund of a very large amount, you might put a dollar cap through which they could make these decisions and then just report back. And then the third item, I'm actually going to hand off to Tanya. Tanya, if you don't mind. This gets to some instances where the Agency of Education may wish to consult with the tax department before making a refund. So if Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I'll hand it off to Tanya.
No, that's good. Just to sum it up, the auditor's office does not have any strong objection, given that we straighten out the wording and the system, to doing some kind of an automatic repayment in these limited events. Okay.
The bill by and large reflects the recommendation we made in the audit. So in that sense, it's exactly as you've described.
Okay, and then Tanya, you're gonna take us into the weeds.
Hopefully I won't go too far.
Say tax, it's weeds.
Yeah, okay, well, it's the end of the day. I don't want you to fall asleep.
Oh, no, we've got a training and then some of us have a school board meeting.
Okay, well, perhaps it's not the end of the day. I'll try to make this exciting. So for the record, Tanya Morehouse, Chief Auditor of the State Auditor's Office. The last item we just wanted to bring to your attention is that there is an existing mechanism in statute for taking care of a related item that we just want to make you aware of, and also that it could cause some potential complications for TIF districts. So in instances when a municipality has a property value that's reduced due to an appeal, and this happens subsequent to when the education tax liability is determined, the Property Valuation and Review Group in the Department of Taxes has the authority to make reductions to the municipality's education tax liability. And the way that the process works is it's actually a credit on their next year's education tax liability. So, so basically, if the appeal settles after the liability is determined, the municipality has paid their education tax liability on a property value that's too high. So this mechanism allows.
That's what happened in this situation, right?
So that was one of the items in Barry. Barry had a lot of issues, but this is one of the items that happened. Yes. So, so municipalities are able to apply to PVR for this credit in the next year's education tax liability. our concern is that with TIF districts that have other errors happening, there could be the potential for a duplication. So we thought you might want to hear from PVR in this case and see whether they think there should be some kind of coordination or check-in with the Agency of Education before any refunds are processed.
Okay. Thank you for that heads up, so we don't make things worse. Question, Senator Pearson.
Yeah,
And
Tanya.
I'm not sure who's got the bad internet connection. It could be me, because some of you keep freezing, but if I disappear, Senator McDonald will take over till I get back on. All right.
That's comforting. Tanya, you mentioned something that's been on my mind, which is the idea of not getting a refund, but just carrying it forward. Has that been the standard until this proposal?
So the mechanism that exists in Title 32, I think, has always been a process through a credit. I think Brad James could probably speak to past refunds that have been processed better than I could, but my understanding is they've actually been payments, not credits on the next year's education tax liability calculation.
Okay, well, if we're going to hear from him later, we can hold the question, but that's, you know, unless these are big amounts, which is not, I don't believe the case in Barry's situation. I guess I have been wondering why we wouldn't just carry it forward, but I'll hold that question until we hear from Brad or others who have more direct knowledge.
Yeah, the only thing that I would say about that is it might be a little bit harder to track the activity over time if you do it as a credit through the calculation of the education tax liability versus a payment out of the state's system. You could just run a report to gather those payments fairly easily, I think, whereas Brad James and folks at education would have to, I think, go through each of their calculations to find those numbers for you. But again, Brad could speak to that probably better than me.
Thanks. Senator McDonald, I think you are in charge.
Senator McDonald, if I may.
Yes, Senator Bray.
They were plowing right outside my house when the first witness spoke. I couldn't catch his last name. If he could just restate it or maybe spell it.
Is this a punchline that I'm not?
Which witness?
I said the first
witness are you referring to? Perhaps you could identify them by first name.
The one with all the books behind him, but I think.
Well, Senator Brock's been an active member of the committee. I'm surprised that you're wondering who he is, but I'm Tim Ash, Senator Bray, as you know, Deputy State Auditor.
Great. They were plowing right outside my window. I just couldn't hear that. Thank you.
Brad James, would you like to answer the question posed by Tanya or Bear? Yeah.
I will do my best. Brad James, Agency of Education, for the record. Generally speaking, when I hear about things where there've been overpayments for whatever reason, it does tend to be a payment that we make back to them out of the ed fund. We do come to the legislature currently. We do come to the legislature, or somebody else comes to the legislature and asks for an appropriation. Then we send it out once that appropriation happens, at the end of the session. I do know that there is that piece of legislation that Tanya was referring to, where it talks about tax credits. If those are happening, that's on the tax PVR side of things. I don't necessarily see those, so I don't know how to do things like that. We do see these things periodically. We get them sometimes from our side, where it's information that we've sent out there where the people misreport their budgets. There's a major error in their ADM calculation or conferencing. Or not conferencing, pardon me, submissions. There are other things that we send out where they make mistakes. We find out after the fact. They may not tell us all their budget in terms of separately warned articles and such. that has an impact. And that's when, impacts or tax rate impacts happen. That's when we come to you. We also hear from the tax department, PV&R, that there were grant list changes. We get those decisions also in court cases after the fact. And again, that's when we come to you. And occasionally we do hear from Tanya and people like that, where, they've done some type of review and things are going on there. So there are a number of reasons why these things happen. We get them every couple of years. If we were to make these payments, if you were to give us the authority to make these payments directly, I would not make anything without backup documentation from the tax department, from the court system, from the auditor's office, wherever they happen to come from. On our side of things, like with ADM, I'm comfortable with that because I understand that process. I do not understand the other processes. I do to a degree, but not to the detail I would want. So I want backup information before we did anything along the lines. I spoke with Secretary French, or was in contact with him. Neither of us have any real problem with saying this is how much we're planning on sending out this year, just coming in and reporting. As Tim said, it does make sense to come to a couple committees as opposed to the whole General Assembly.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Mr. James was explaining whether or not how things worked. I would suggest, Madam Chair, we might, as a committee, want to, if we're going to be making districts whole for mistakes, we might want to come with a policy that does it one way or the other, but perhaps doesn't mix and match depending on the situation. But that would be for the
Okay. We'll see
committee
that.
to
And I
recommend
apologize.
when we're done.
Apparently
Thank you.
Faith and I got kicked out. We're emailing and she came back in, so I got back in. I know they're having trouble at the State House with the dual remote and in-person, and this is the only committee we haven't had issues in today, so now we've had some issues. Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brad, what I'm trying to understand is what's the advantage of you cutting a check for 50 grand back to a town versus rolling it forward and giving them a credit a month later? That's what I would just like clarity on.
I think usually when we're asking to cut a check to a town, because we can't do that currently, usually what we're doing is we're not just saying that money can be used for any specific purpose. We usually put some type of string attached to it because the money is actually from the education side of the world, not the town side of the world. We can't really give it back necessarily to the school district, so we tend to give it back to the affected towns themselves. And so what we do is we put in something saying that's to reduce taxes from what they're going to be doing, as opposed to saying, oh, we have this extra money coming in, let's do this. That's kind of what we're trying to do. If you're doing it as a tax credit, I don't know if that would be a possibility or not.
I know it would delay the payment. I think the town would rather have the check now than pay less next year, but we also, it sounds like nobody's objecting to doing this. It's just figuring out a system that's going to work and reduces the potential for double dipping through clerical error more than anything. And so any suggestions? I know Abby's listening and we're going to have to ask her to draft something. So this bill calls for the Department of Ed to cut a check, right? And you're saying with certain documentation, you could do that.
Yes.
But there is also the system already established for non-TIF districts in the tax department, especially when it's a property valuation that's changed after the payment has changed. So it sounds like we do need to talk to property valuation, and we need to have them back anyway because they got cut short yesterday. And any thinking you could do would be helpful, and drop an email to Abby. Because we're now into working out the legal nitty gritty, which is beyond most of our pay grade. Does that make sense, committee? Mr. Ash, I'm so close to saying Senator.
Thank you. I just don't need to belabor the point, but just want to say that one approach might just, and this, I think Brad alluded to this, he would be checking in with PBR before releasing, if that made sense, is it could just be as simple as saying that they should, in section 3, in consultation with PBR or the Department of Taxes, just to acknowledge that there is more complexity to some of these than others, and they would benefit from that coordination rather than diving into a rather weedy series of scenarios that could play out.
Okay. Committee, would that work if we had Abby and Brad kind of talk and see if we can get some tighter wording in there and then go forward? Abby, do you have enough to start with?
So for the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel, I'm understanding that you want to change the education fund section that's authorizing the Secretary of Education to make the refunds.
Yeah.
So Mr. Ash's recommendation would be to include in consultation with the Department of Taxes, PBR. Is that the only change that you wanted to make, or do you want to wait until you hear from PBR? I'm just not clear if there are other changes.
At this point, I can't think of any. Committee. We've got a couple minutes. Maybe, can you walk us right now? We're just going to cut a check to Barry. And then in the future, can you walk us through what's
Sure.
in
So
there?
Section 2, starting on the 3rd page, has this new language that has sort of this dance, and Senator Hardy had pointed out some of the timing, some confusion about the timing. And there are 2 different dates that are relevant in there. First, there's the annual reporting. It is very broad. There wasn't any specification to committees. We could change the names of the committees to specify who the Secretary of Education is reporting to. Anticipated refunds to municipalities prior to issuance. And that was included, Madam Chair, as a sort of a check, not necessarily, not in any way requiring the General Assembly to approve the refunds, but just giving sort of an advance notice to allow the General Assembly to take any action they didn't want the refunds to.
So, yeah, all right. So
and
this
then
would just be an email to the General Assembly saying we're about to refund X $1,000 to the town of. Is that okay?
More or less, yes.
Yeah. All right.
I'm sure Brad would find a very nice way of saying all of that.
I'm sure there's a more elegant way to say it.
That was just based on the committee's discussion. Would you like me to specify the committees that it would be reported to, since this is very specific, having it go to the whole
probably the money committees in education.
Sure. Great. So that change could be made there. And then there was an annually on or before June 30th date. So it's just by the end of the school year, at the end of the fiscal year, the secretary has the authority to authorize the refunds. So it didn't require all refunds to go out at the same time. That's one open question there. It's just the assumption that the payments will be made by the end of each fiscal year. And then it's also the only refunds that would be eligible, the only overpayments that would be eligible are those overpayments made in the immediately preceding 4 fiscal years. So it was also limited in time.
Okay, 4 fiscal years. So like if a claim came in April 30th, is that or it came in May 28th or 29th. Are we cutting it too tight?
That would then go into the next.
It would go into the next year. Okay, okay. As long as
I
we're
mean,
not,
unless you wanted to strike the requirement to report in advance. But that, I mean, that was built into the structure of reporting January 15th, what the secretary anticipates refunding. And then by June 30th, the refunds would go out. And my recollection, at least from the 2020 refunds that went out, and Brad, you can correct me about this, but they went back a fair amount in time. They were from several years prior. So I think you usually know in advance.
I think Abby, you're correct. I think some they were for a couple of years prior. We usually hear within 1 or 2 years. Going back 3 or 4 years is a long time.
okay.
Those tend more to be court cases and things like that, or as in this case with the auditors going in, the state auditor's office going in and searching things out and finding things.
Okay. So Brad, any suggestion? I mean, I don't want to set up any more paperwork than we need just to have some accountability and don't find out.
Yeah, I mean, I actually like some accountability, frankly, because it keeps us,
Yeah,
and not that we're going to be dishonest, but it keeps us honest, for lack of a better term. I think the way it's structured, where we report to either General Assembly or the committees, is not a bad idea at all. I do like the fact that we will tell you what we were going to be sending out beforehand. I'm assuming it's coming out of the general adjusted education payment. That's where it's coming from. I don't think we need a separate appropriation or anything for this. And I think the way it stands with the modifications that Abby was just talking about, that suggested by folks, I think it'll work. I mean,
okay.
I'd rather, Secretary French also said the same thing, that we'd rather it was not a formal report, something easy, saying here's what we're going to do.
I'm not thinking of a formal report. I think it's nice to know you're making a $5 million refund before we start getting emails saying, did you know?
Yeah. I mean, I will say that the last one that I remember paying out is one Abby just referred to, and that was just under $500,000. And that's probably the ballpark of where they tend to usually fall, off the top of my head. If it was a large amount, we certainly would definitely come to you all and make sure that it was okay. So I think having us report with a timeline saying that, we could pick up whatever we have with all the data before January 15th, then that's kind of the cutoff, as Abby was saying, till the next year. That makes perfect sense.
Okay. So committee, does this work? Okay, Abby, you've got enough to go on. Anybody else have anything to add? Okay.
Madam Chair, there were just some
yes.
cleanup suggestions.
Okay.
So I don't know if those had been sort of translated, or Abby, if you heard them all.
Which ones are you thinking of? I know we
I
no
don't know.
annual report, just a notice.
Yeah, so there was that. Then there was unusual wording about the timing of the fiscal year.
Yeah.
I don't know, that I didn't think they were substantive changes, but looking for clarity.
We'll take a look at that wording, but the idea is the payments, we get notified in April, the payments get made by the end of the fiscal year, or they go into the next fiscal year. Is that?
I think you're referring to the not later than fiscal year 2023 in the first section, which is the refund to bear. Typically
varies.
In fiscal year, and it leaves it open. This language was added in. It doesn't necessarily have to be there. It could just be in fiscal year 2023.
Abby was drafting for me, and I had the separate section, and for Representative Anthony, who just wanted his city to get their money back. So there's been some mix and match going on. I think this one Yeah, as long as we get rid of that 23 and it's just by the end of the fiscal year, we're fine. Okay. Okay.
Madam
Well,
Chair, before I
yeah.
sign off, can I make an
Yes.
observation? I already have a bit of a nervous smile. Some have called it a smirk. But when I was looking up and seeing Senator Sorokin and Senator Pearson's still image with those big smiles, it's almost impossible to look at those and not break into a beaming smile. So you have to excuse other witnesses in the future if that happens to them. It was
They're
almost
cheering.
contagion. It was a contagion.
Speaking for Chris, we'll take that as a compliment.
Yes.
Very wonderful smiles, I should add.
And then there's Senator McDonald, who's fading in and out of the snowbank. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Tim, it was good to see you again. I hope you're
Great to see you
enjoying
all.
your life across the street, which you probably aren't there too often. And thank everyone. Tanya and committee, we've got maybe 20 minutes before we have the training at 5. Okay, so thank you, and we'll see you all tomorrow.
Ending live
Madam-
stream.